Hello, and welcome to a very special Canadian Premier League final edition of the CPL Newsroom, presented by Volkswagen. Charlie O'Connor-Clark, joined by Mitchell Tierney and Alexander Gange-Ruzic. As we now know, the last two teams standing in the CPL in 2025, it will be Atlético Ottawa hosting Cavalry FC in the CPL final this Sunday, November 9th, in the capital, 5 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Mountain, 2 p.m. Pacific, broadcast across the country and around the world. OneSoccer, TSN3. No excuses. Don't miss the game. And guys, we are going to start this week with Cavalry because we knew last week it would be Ottawa. We knew that they'd be hosting because they beat Forge. Cavalry went into Hamilton on Sunday and they did the same for a third consecutive time now. The Cavs have beaten Forge FC in the playoffs after heading into last year's playoffs. They'd never done it before in the postseason. Mitchell, you and I were at this game in Hamilton. Let's maybe start by just digging a little bit into how Cavalry did it and maybe just kind of how we feel that they've kind of flipped the narrative in this rivalry they've had over the years against Forge.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the defending champions, and they really look like it this year. I mean, two wins in the playoffs now, and they've done it in two different ways. They go out and fire on all cylinders against York, put up 4 goals for the first time in a CPL knockout match, and get that one over the line, and then go to Hamilton, and it's maybe a little bit of a different game plan, a bit more of a savvy road performance where they maybe aren't as open, they sit back a little bit more, but then obviously when they have their chance they take it. And where I think we've really seen the growth from this Cavalry team is two different things. And it starts before the match with the mentality, and I think one of those mentality shifts is the fact that this Cavalry team now focuses on how they can be their best in any given day. Whether that's at home, whether that's away in the CPL playoffs, and I think we see that with an unchanged 11 from them. They know what their best mix is. They're not trying to think of, okay, let's adjust here maybe to, go up against Forge's tactical plans or in the final Atlético Ottawa's tactical plans. I think we'll see a very similar Cavalry side in the final because they know their strengths and they play within them. And then you see it in this game, the way that they're able to see out matches now. Like, it was just so professional from the moment they scored that goal to the final whistle, slowing down the game at key moments. They came very close to getting a second where they picked those good moments to go forward, but it wasn't going forward with abandon, right? It was like, okay, let's let Gote do what he does best and run down the wing and beat a few guys. But obviously those midfielders sat back. They didn't get too excited and move forward. And then, if the chance went begging, then if Forge recycle, okay, we're in set positions and we're ready to go. So I think we've seen that experience really pay off for this Cavalry side in terms of what they've done in the past in the playoffs. And I think that just that mentality, that championship mentality is so clear from this Cavalry side now and paid off for them in Hamilton. And we'll see, how it pays off for them in Ottawa.
Yeah, Cavalry are the defending champions, as we know. And as you mentioned, Mitchell, look like it in these playoffs. It is going to be very difficult to get that North Star Cup out of their hands. I think that the last two playoff runs from Cavalry have really, really impressed me, kind of from Tommy Wheeldon Jr.'s perspective in particular, and his kind of development as a coach. And we've been talking about this a little bit as well. The way that Tommy has kind of not overthought it in the playoffs. Last year he goes into the final. He's seen Forge so many times that year. He'd just beaten them, but he just goes with the same team, and it works. This is the exact same. He try something a little bit new against York United, as we talked about, putting Toby Warszewski and Kenija Elva up front together. It worked really well against York. Again, you just go with the guys that you trust once again against Forge. Let's be very honest, a much more difficult game than playing a tired York team at home. And again, it worked. And the contrast is that Forge did not go with the same thing that had been working for them. They made changes in this game. Malik Olabi-Belawu comes into the back line. Nana Ampoma comes back in, which means David Chouanier and Tristan Borges are on the bench, two of Forge's historic best playoff performers, including Chouanier, who arguably, in my opinion, had been maybe Forge's most dangerous player in the last 2 weeks. So the changes on that side kind of contrasted to Cavalry just sticking with their guns and it working out for them is impressive to me. But AGR, it's not always been kind of the smooth sailing for Cavalry this season, right? They've been playing with a bit of a chip on their shoulder this year. They felt like they've been doubted and maybe overlooked a little in the CPL. Obviously, finished third, finished well off the top two, I think we have to say. How have you seen this Cavalry squad kind of return to itself, kind of get its confidence back over the course of the season, and how dangerous does that make them at this time of year?
Makes them supremely dangerous, right? Because that's kind of playoff teams, quote unquote. Some teams just know how to dial it up for the big games. And it's funny because Cavalry 1.0, if you want to call it that, was the opposite. They'd always steamroll through the regular season, but then it would come to the playoffs and they would just kind of be the team that would trip over themselves, that would maybe make the wrong decision. They'd be on the wrong end of bad decisions, of luck, of things just wouldn't go their way. And it's remarkable to see the shift that's in this group that, yeah, okay, when things aren't going wrong in the regular season, they're like, all right, you know what? That feeling of lifting a CPL shield in 2023, but then losing heartbreakingly in that final, even though they played well and took a lead late at Hamilton Stadium. And then in 2024, that feeling of winning a trophy at home, North Star Cup, finally getting that one that had eluded them for 6 seasons up to that point. There's just kind of this calm in this group now. It was almost frenetic in past playoff experiences. And that's important because there was times at the season we have to remember for Cavalry this year, it wasn't, we weren't looking at them being like, there's a lack of talent. Like they have an excellent forward group. Yeah. This one Stan Klump came back on paper. There's an excellent defensive group. You know what Marco Carducci can do in a big game. The midfield is great. It's just been injury riddled all year long. So it's not surprising for me for them to have taken all those pieces, put the puzzle together, locked in, and played well. It's just in the regular season. And, you see that sometimes. It's tough to win a championship, then playing CONCACAF early in the year, and then just keep playing. It's exhausting. So I think for them, you've kind of seen mentally the regular season is really tough for them, but they've been able to kind of just wipe these playoffs. And I think that's kind of caught, teams by surprise, especially, York, they were tired. Forge clearly were a bit, beat down mentally after losing to Ottawa the way they did. And now they'll tackle an Ottawa team who will have to be worried because you never want to play defending champions, and especially when they're rolling the way they are.
Yeah, absolutely. This Cavalry team is just tough, right? I think we forget a little bit that, Dan Klump has only been there half the season. It's a little weird that he wasn't there for the first half because he just is such a staple in his Cavalry team, was part of the title-winning team last year. He's part of the team before that. So we do forget that he wasn't there. Gauthier Intigne also wasn't there until about, I think, end of July with this club. And again, a locked-in starter at this time of the year. Plus, this Cavalry team has faced a lot of injuries this year, right? I mean, Sergio Camargo, as we know, arguably their best player in the regular season, nominated for Player of the Year, has not played in the playoffs. And I think it would require some serious change of circumstances for him to play in the final. It sounds like they're gonna try him out and test him out and see if they can get anything at all out of him in the final on Sunday. But I think that it would be kind of a miracle if they can even get Camargo on the bench at this point. But other guys that they've been missing, Diego Gutierrez, Eric Kobza, Baldissimo, Bradley Camden, Shamit Shom, they've all missed over 10 games this season, right? And all of these are core pieces of this Cavalry team, which they've had to contend with. And I think maybe that has led to some of the doubt around this team when the results weren't going their way. I mean, we've doubted them here on this show as some members of Cavalry have reminded me over the weekend. But I think at this point, we all are fully aware of how dangerous they are, how talented they are, and the fact that they are defending champions. Obviously, we did catch up with Tommy Wilden Jr. after the game in Hamilton on Sunday, and he spoke a little bit about the way that they approach playing Forge, and here's what he had to say.
They were a wounded animal. I think the first 15-20 we were chasing, they were putting a lot of pressure on us, and we had to survive in it. And I think that was very similar to last year's semi-final. Bend but not break. Sergio Camargo, even though he didn't travel, there's a reminder the lads is, at times we've got to know we've got to come here, and you've got to suffer a little bit. But no, in doing so, if you don't break, you're going to have opportunities the other way, which we did. And that's credit to the way the lads absorbed it, blocked it. You know, players like Sham and Cobbs are, you know, you don't necessarily see them on the highlights, but they cover so much ground and allow people to get up the pitch, the defenders, blocks, interceptions. So I thought we responded well. Once the energy of that went, and I thought we then got into the game, and I thought we were the better team second half.
Yeah, and I think he's right. Tommy also said earlier in that press conference that, you know, he'd spoken to his team earlier this year after they went to Hamilton and lost on opening day, that he didn't think Forge were going to beat them again that year, and they didn't. Right? I mean, we remember Forge riding that 20-game unbeaten streak, go to Cavalry for the first time in the season, and they suffer their worst loss of the year in the regular season, lost 4-1 there. So again, this is a dangerous Cavalry team. Before we move on to a full CPL final preview, we do need a last word on Forge FC, though, guys. You know, for the first time ever, their season ends before the final. It's going to be a little strange not having them in the CPL final this year, but you know, it's a credit to the other two teams who both had to beat them to get to this point. They did win the CPL Shield. They did go 20 games unbeaten. They only lost 2. Mitchell, maybe let's start with kind of the feeling for Forge coming out of this playoff run and how disappointing it is. You know, where do you stand on kind of what went wrong for them over these 2 games at home?
Yeah, I just wonder if, obviously we've spoken all year about how much depth they have, but I wonder if they never truly found their best 11 and what that looked like and what was the best mix of, you know, attackers, midfielders. You know, I think they pretty much had the back line sorted out for most of the year, but obviously they switched that up in this game as well. So maybe not entirely. And I just wonder if that was the case over those 2 games. I also think there probably was a bit of a fatigue. Like, it is so difficult to maintain your standards over those 28 games and be the ones that are leading at the head of the pack for so long. You know, it was midway through the season that they took over that lead in the Shield brace and obviously never gave it back up. So then you have to go into the playoffs, and obviously other teams have been kind of waiting in the wings to elevate their performance and to have those slates kind of cleaned. And all of a sudden, you know, all the hard work you've done is, you know, it does put you in that championship semifinal, but obviously there's no other advantage past that. Everything is clear. So yeah, I think just maybe it's part and parcel of not knowing entirely what their best 11 was. And also at the end of the season, just the difficulty of raising the level once again at that time when it's been so high all year. I think maybe those 2 things just caught up with them a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You know, and even Bobby Smirniotis kind of talked about hunger versus the desperation that the other 2 teams they were playing against in the playoffs had. But as he also reminded us, Forge are the only team that have actually won anything this year so far. They've got a trophy. They've got a CONCACAF Champions Cup spot. One of Atlético, Ottawa, and Cavalry will not have one of those, right? One of these 2 teams is going to finish this season more empty-handed than Forge, right? Which is kind of what Bobby was alluding to when he talked about teams playing with desperation. But obviously it doesn't, you know, it's a tough thing to really say convincingly at this time of the season after 2 straight home losses and elimination. But Bobby was still kind of talking about how he believes this is the best Forge team he's worked with and the best team in the league. AGR, a few months down the road, how do you think we are going to look back at this year's Forge team?
Yeah, I still think it's like a pretty great Forge team. I think that's what can't be forgotten. I think for Forge, I think they just kind of ran out of gas. And I really look at one key point in their season. It was the Whitecaps loss in leg 2 of the Canadian Championship. Because I think for them, obviously in normal circumstances, they lose to the Whitecaps. It happens. This Whitecaps team is on an all-time run. You know, no shame in that. But I think Forge, there's just something about this Canadian Championship, the way that it turned out, the way they got past Montreal so convincingly for the draw to spit out the Whitecaps. Meanwhile, you know, Ottawa and Vancouver on the other side, Forge is probably sitting there. Not that they're ones to bemoan a draw, but they're thinking, man, imagine if you have a crack at Ottawa in the semifinal instead, or you have a crack at Vancouver instead. Just losing that way to the Whitecaps, and that was kind of that was it. Like there are 3 teams, CPL teams in the semifinal. I think that's really where their level dropped, because obviously that Cavalry loss happens a bit before then. It was already, they'd already started to turn their attention to that Canadian Championship. And then after, they just lost such a big part of their season. And even they knew that even if they win the CPL Shield, so be it. They won it last year. You saw how much it meant to them. The celebrations were quite subdued given the grandeur of the occasion and the trophy. And that, by the time it comes to the playoffs, for whatever reason, I wonder if in their heads they built up this idea of being a treble winner, being historic Can Champ winners, that by the time the playoffs came around, the idea of still being the first CPL team to win a double, we'll wait till 2026 for that, still just wasn't as built up in their heads. And that's where that lack of hunger was. So I really think that turning point in late August, early September with Cavalry, I guess, started it with getting rid of the undefeated run. Because that was another thing. Like, for once, I think Forge had built up so much in the season, whereas the story of past seasons has just been September onwards. And I think that's where they ran out of gas in that subtle ways, because of Can Champ and then even the undefeated run. I'll add into that.
Yeah, absolutely. But anyway, we do say goodbye to Forge FC for the 2025 season, because we have to talk about the final. Atlético Ottawa, Cavalry, Sunday, November 9th in the capital. This one's really exciting. I remember the last time the CPL final was in Ottawa. It was a really, really fun week. They had a great crowd. I think about 15,000 people at TD Place. They're trying to get more than that this year, which would be quite a special moment. But on the pitch, that last final was a disappointment for Atlético Ottawa. Right? They had finished top of the table in the regular season. They knocked out Pacific to get to the final, and they were outplayed by Forge in that game, 2-0, a really, really kind of frustrating and disappointing loss for that team. Only two players on the current Ottawa squad who were there, Nathan Ingham and Balu Tabla, have both, that memory in their minds of losing the final at home. But again, Cavalry, 3 straight finals, won one last year, know what it takes to win the North Star Cup and how good that feeling is. Mitchell, we'll start with you. What does your gut tell you about this game? It seems like a hard one to pick.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard one to pick, because this is the first time under this format we've seen two clubs come in where one of them didn't beat the other earlier in the playoffs, right? Like, there's no obvious mental advantage for either of these sides. Obviously, Cavalry come in the defending champions. They've done it before. That's always going to give them an advantage. But Atlético Ottawa have had their number all year. This is the only team that Cavalry didn't beat this year in the Canadian Premier League. And now they've kind of had their number in their entire history. And, you look at some of the performances that their top attackers have had against Cavalry this season. So it's a really tough final to call, because, again, as you mentioned earlier in the show, like, both of these teams absolutely need this result. Like, they have no laurels to rest on going into this game. There's no regular season title for either of them heading into this match. So I think that makes it tremendously exciting. I think it's such a tough one to call. I have to kind of give the edge to the home team. I think that rest will serve an Atlético Ottawa team that haven't rotated much this season incredibly well, maybe better than even some of the past CPL finalists, even if Diego Mejia hasn't necessarily, been the most positive on the rest for his group. Managers always love to get immediately stuck into the next match. But I think for a lot of his players that have played long seasons, that will help them out. And, I think especially if they can come out and get on the front foot, like we heard that Ottawa crowd in 2022, and they were just waiting for that one moment to really embrace, the atmosphere and get that goal and just set that stadium alight. And it just never happened. But I think this year, this Ottawa team has the players to make that goal happen and to get that crowd right into it. And then from there, I think that momentum could carry them over the line.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point about kind of the extra rest. Obviously, both finals we've had under this format, the home team, the rested team, has won, that being Forge in 23 and Cavalry last year. And especially for an Ottawa team, which, it has to be said, has not rotated very much this season, right? They've pretty much rolled out around like 13 starters, 13, 14 starters when they're all healthy throughout the year. So this is a tired bunch, which has played a lot of football together. However, that does mean that they, again, have a very good handle of what their best 11 is. And I think it'll be we'll get to it in a sec here at the end, but I think we have a very good idea of who's going to play for Atlético Ottawa this weekend. And it also has to be said, history favors Ottawa very, very heavily, especially this year. 3 wins, 1 draw in the 4 games against Cavalry this year. Last time they played, September 27th in Ottawa, Atleti beat them 3-0. The time before that in Ottawa, Cavalry actually took a 2-0 lead, and then Ottawa clawed back for a 2-2 draw. And again, a couple of big wins for Ottawa in Calgary this year as well, including that disastrous one for the Cavs up in back in kind of late April, where I think it was that kind of chaotic nightmare stretch for the Camden in particular, where there's an own goal and then a red card and then Ottawa score pretty much, again, almost immediately. So, a couple of Cavalry's most frustrating moments this year have come at the hands of Atlético Ottawa. AGR, we've talked a lot about Ottawa here in this kind of preview, but from a Cavalry side, does memories of recent defeats and frustration against Ottawa maybe fuel you going into this game and give you a good idea of what you cannot do again in this final?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's lots to learn. I think there's also an emotional side to it. We know this Cavalry team tends to play well when they're a bit pissed off and they've got a bit of that heat under their collar, so to speak. And I think they'll have that because this has quietly been a very good rivalry. Immediately, we're talking this week of memorable Ottawa Cavalry moments. Like there was, a few years ago and the Luke Singh bicycle game, Tommy Wilden Jr. hitting the who are you, like Jose Mourinho to the fans at Ottawa. Even this year,
Meyer Bevan in the crowd at Ottawa.
That's a Meyer Bevan there's just so many good moments, even though these teams have a bit of a shorter history than say some of the other matchups. That I think for Cavalry, there's an emotional side of, man, like, got to get these guys back in their building. And for Cavalry, I think they're also kind of focused on what they need to do. Ultimately, they're the defending champions. They're looking at Ottawa being like, look, Ottawa, you guys have kind of, thrown away some of your best chances to win a trophy, like in 22 in the final, or this year. They led for, so long in the regular season. Cavalry's also just going to be like, look, yeah, you've beat us a bunch in the regular season, but beat us when it counts. That's going to be kind of the message from Tommy Wilden Jr. And I think you're going to see that in the group. What's fascinating about this matchup, though, is these are 2 teams with such convincing ideologies that it's going to be a bit of a stubborn tete-a-tete. There's not going to be any mind games from Mejia in terms of, let's, throw it a back 5 instead of a 3 and sit back a little more. He's going to want the ball and absolutely suffocate Cavalry. On the flip side, they know how they defend. They know how they attack. They know to get the ball to Tobias Warszewski in clutch moments, to get the fullbacks forward, to mug up the midfield. And I think that's what's going to be fascinating is this is truly going to be a final defined by individuals. We often say it's going to be battles, and that's the case a bit, but it's not going to be tactical battles. It's truly going to be individuals. It's, can Warszewski win the game? Can David Rodriguez win the game? Sam Salter, Kanija Elva, all these guys are going to have an increased spotlight on them. And I think that's kind of fascinating because so often these finals delve into what are the coaches doing, what personnel choices. I think you could probably pick 22 of the guys and we would be pretty close to what the 11s are going to be. And I think that's pretty rare for a final between 2 teams like this.
Yeah, it's so exciting. There's so many kind of candidates to be the hero in this game. Obviously we've got Salter, Rodriguez, Tabla as a 3-headed monster at the front of Ottawa's attack, but Cavalry, in the playoffs, have got a 4-headed monster, and Warszewski is undefeated in the playoffs in his career. He scored 5 goals in 4 games. He's now the CPL's all-time leading playoff scorer. However, the only stadium in the CPL where he has not scored for Cavalry is TD Place. Sam Salter, by the way, scored 3 times against Cavalry this year. He's got 7 in his career against the Cavs. They're actually his second favorite opponent, if you'd believe it. But again, just so many stars in this game, which is going to make it a lot of fun. Mitchell, AGR said that he thinks we can get 22 out of 22 in terms of who's starting this game. I guess the simple question is, do you foresee a scenario where either manager makes any changes to their 11 from the previous game?
The only potential change I could maybe see is a Tier Walker coming in for Atlético Ottawa, in terms of just that back 3 and the right side there. But
Yeah.
otherwise, I think it's going to be pretty much what we've seen already. Like, I think both of these sides have found their best mix at this time of year, and will stick with that through a final. So yeah, I don't foresee many changes.
I think I agree. And I mean, we said earlier in his show that Tommy Wilden Jr. has been sticking to his guns. He's had that back four of Gerasimenkov, Field, Klomp, and Aird. If Bradley Camden's fit, or a Callum Montgomery or a Levi Lang, I still don't know if you make a change to that back four, just because of how good it's been. I think maybe there's different faces on the benches for both sides. A bit of a surprise that Callum Montgomery was a healthy scratch against Forge. But again, I think we pretty much know what this game is going to look like. There are no secrets between these sides at this time of year, and that is maybe what makes it even more exciting. It's just going to be two very good football teams throwing the absolute best they have at one another, and I honestly have no idea where it's going to go. But that's why we're going to play the game. That's why we're going to go to Ottawa, and we're going to watch, along with hopefully several thousand of our closest friends in the capital region. If you're in the region, or if you're anywhere close to Ottawa, or even if you're in Calgary and you've got the weekend off, head down to TD Place. It's going to be a very, very special evening. Obviously kicking off at 5:00, but it's fan fest around the stadium beginning, I believe, at 3 before the game. So make sure you head down early. And if you're not able to make it to the CPL final, it will, as always, be broadcast on OneSoccer and TSN. So don't miss it. Make sure you follow along with us at OneSoccer and CPL Soccer on social media for all of our coverage throughout the week, from Media Day, from Awards Night on Friday night, and from everything leading up to the final. And we'll see you next week when we know who the 2025 North Star Cup champion is. This is the CPL Newsroom presented by Volkswagen, and goodbye.
Some waver, some fall, but not the North. Pressure doesn't break us, it builds us.